first questions I'd like to pose as part of the panel discussion now with both of you is clearly both of your companies are moving from ideas to action, and that means increasing activity across very complex organizations on this circular economy journey. How do you think about keeping track of and measuring progress so that you know we're moving in the right direction? Maybe let's continue with you, Kate, first.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, being able to measure, quantify, compare how we're progressing towards our circularity goals is, I think, our greatest challenge at Enel. And as such, one of the ways that we are seeking to tackle this is we've developed what we call the circulability model, which is based on the life cycle analysis methodology. And it works across our 5 pillars, the image that I previously showed, and includes sub-indicators such as avoided waste, emissions reductions, materials recovery. It's a model to help us keep us on track and understand where we are and where we desire to go. And I think it serves as a foundation for our work in circularity.
Tom?
Sure. So obviously the toolkit is our first, at the moment, first. We are looking to talk about, maybe a little too early yet, but at COP this year we're looking to release circularity for toolkit for infrastructure, which will be a big piece. There's the natural resources in that. I think the measurement of progress is what's important. I honestly, if somebody said to me what would be the 5 things you'd pick, I'd say it depends on what you want to prioritize. But measure them. Establish a baseline, think about what good looks like, and measure it, and hold yourself accountable. So it's going to be different for every project, every commitment. But measurement's the only way to get better. But do not let it become a checklist. It needs to be a live document. If we get a checklist and we sit back and go, that's great, we've ticked the boxes, we're done. We're not done. We're scratching the surface. And the more we do and the more we challenge, the more we know. And so when we account for it and look at what it means and how we say, is that good enough? That's the bit that we need to keep moving. So, the toolkit's great, but use it as an iterative thing. Whatever you do as your metric, whatever you choose, and there's other metrics out there for just picking the right thing. Measure it, keep measuring it, and challenge yourself to do better. Because again, we are at the surface of a much, much deeper problem.
That's a great point, and I think it's early days in terms of measurement and aligning on these complex questions, and I think keeping it dynamic and keeping it collaborative and improving on the way we do things makes a lot of sense. You mentioned the toolkit that Arup has developed. Could you talk a little bit more about it, what excites you particularly about the toolkit, and give some examples of how business can use it, because I'm sure we have a lot of businesses in the audience that would benefit from understanding a bit more what it's about.
Sure. So the thing that I think excites me the most is that, honestly, this isn't a pitch, I'm just saying, it's free. We've designed it intentionally because it was important to our team putting it together that it's not just a leadership thing. This was our entire team that was involved. That it was available to people with an equity piece, because if we put a price on it, it means that some people won't be able to afford it, and that's not equitable. That's still capitalism. So yeah, we're still a business, believe it or not. So the thing that I like the most is that it's free. And working with EMF, it's a really important part of what we've done together to make these things available for free. And by the way, just in case you didn't know about the resources available on the EMF website, you should go and check it out. There's a ton of stuff in there that no matter what business you're in, from fashion to food to buildings, it's all covered. There's ideas, there's thought processes to go. So EMF's the place to go. I nearly said MAF's the place to
That's okay.
So that's what makes me excited about it. Who can use it or what do we do? I think it was partly designed with the owners in mind. So design teams, I have to say this, I am one. We're really smart people. Right? And so are developers, but in a different skill set. And so the one thing that the toolkit allows you to do, and this is the important bit, is that it's collaborative across everything. So I mentioned before about you should have stakeholders, the developers in the room, all of the engineers, architects, for sure. But you should also maybe have some community folk. You should also have the guy with the spreadsheet that tells you what economic good looks like, and make them work hard for their money. So the collaborative nature of it, I think, is one of the key elements. That it's not for a tool that you give to the architects and say, just go work that out. No, that's good, get there. Right? It's for everybody, and everybody should have an opinion, because that's the only way we're going to make change, is together. Right? With no one person in this room, regardless of how smart we all are, has the answer for everything in circular economy. We need to be partnered up to look across. Last year we did a piece about looking over the wall. And so we interviewed financial institutions. Actually, we interviewed Peter Enel, and I forget who the third, but they were from an adjacent industry. And it was, well, what does good look like for you in the circular economy? How do you decide on what makes the right project? What's your return on investment? Again, we're still businesses, right? So what's your return on investment? Not financially, but overall. And so understanding some of that, I think, is one of the things that makes me excited about it.
Great. It sounds like something we all have to check out and get familiar with.
There's no quiz.
No quiz? Okay. Great. Maybe next year, the next Circular City Week. But you really emphasized this point about collaboration, and Kate, you talked a lot about the need, especially in the Scope 3 context, to engage with not just your colleagues and immediate stakeholders, but also your whole client and customer base, and suppliers as well. If you could talk a little bit to how you go about that, and it could seem overwhelming because I'm sure you have quite a lot of customers and clients being that far upstream and providing such a fundamental service. How do you actually deliver against that?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think, a circular solution usually can't be sought within one company alone, right? So you're just starting there. You need to collaborate, and it usually requires you to collaborate with organizations that you probably haven't historically collaborated with before. But I think that's actually part of the really exciting component of all of this, right? It allows us to find new opportunities, engage with folks that we otherwise wouldn't have, hear different perspectives. It just opens up a world of possibility when you do that. I think, for an organization, it starts with understanding your own impact, and then understanding and setting your goals. You have to start somewhere. You have to set a structure around how you're going to hold yourself accountable to that. To Tom's point, you need to continuously assess and analyze how you're doing, and then pivot continuously, right? Because this is all new, and we need to innovate. I think once you've set your strategy, then you start thinking about partners to engage, and you start testing the waters and experimenting. Like, you can't set a path and then just start running head down towards it, because things will change. This is evolving space. Once you learn new pieces, that will set you on a new course. So it's highly iterative. But I think, you need to have the will to embark on this journey, and the discipline to put a plan in place and then hold yourself accountable to figuring out how you're going to meet that.
Great, thank you for those insights. Tom, maybe to add on that, in terms of collaborating with customers, clients, what's your experience in Arup?
the way we would normally do it, we would look at the problem, not the brief, but what's the problem we're trying to solve. The brief's part of that, and then you break it down like you would do with most things in life. You say, okay, well, we know this, we know this, we know this, we don't know that, right? So let's find somebody who's A1 in that and get their advice. And so you break it down, and I often say to my clients is that we have an office that we run nearly everything you need in a built environment, but I'm not going to give you our, let's pick on some of them, there's none of them here I don't think, but we're not going to give you our lighting team, and we're not going to give you, on this project, we're not going to give you our plumbing team. Because we think there's better people to address your specific issue on this. They're either connected, they know the building, they know this place. So it's the right choice for the right project, and that takes a lot of explaining to your line management about why we're not maximising our own resources. But it's really a place where you've got to go and say, no, we need to have the right people. Right? So that's just on every project. For something in circular economy, that's amplified because we need a series of experts, a series of people. Then you need links to the community. And I don't just mean an outreach. I mean physically bringing somebody in or a number of folk in to advise on what happens in that community, who's available to work on this from the community. Businesses, we're going through one program right now, and we're doing outreach for specific tasks and engineering skills and architecture skills to say, look, we need people to own this, right? We can't parachute in, do a project with a client, and then just like, adios, and go. Right? We need to have a grounding in that place, in that location for authenticity. So authenticity is really important to me, and I think without that, we're just talking heads. And I think that is literally just a circuit of folk who just talk because they like hearing their own voice. The authenticity of saying, no, we need to make change, we need to do something different, cannot happen alone. Find the people, sorry, I'm looking at you, actually. Find the people who are experts, even if it's just a tiny little thing, and think about how they can make a difference to your venture, your project, your goals, your ambitions. Who do you need, right? There is no harm at all in asking or saying, I don't know. Right? The strongest results come from when you start with a position of, I don't know. I don't know how we get there. Let's work it out. The only way you can do that, is that another thing for me to So start with I don't know. And then work out who do you need? Who do you need help from? When do you need the help? You don't need everybody at the same time. When do you need the help? Be strategic. And I said this to my team yesterday. I know it was Sunday. I still said it to them yesterday. Is that remember that culture eats strategy for breakfast. So build a culture in your organizations, in your teams, in your home life. Build a culture of doing better. Because that will, if you can get everybody to believe the same thing and go in the same direction, that will absolutely make the outcome better. And it won't be you pushing all the time. You'll find yourself being pushed, which is the best outcome. That little phrase has been used a ton recently, and it's one that I actually really think speaks a lot to our organisation. It's one of the reasons we partnered with Enel on a few things as well. In talking with Peter Perrault, who's one of the folk there. So that's where I would say.
Great, yeah, and listening to both of you, it seems like it's definitely also about culture and mindset shifts, not just technical innovations and so on. But I wanted to go a bit deeper into one of the things both of you mentioned. You said, Tom, we are still a business. Michelle, Kate talked about the importance of product as a service models. So new business models, if we go into that space and rethinking entirely the way we approach certain problem statements as a business. If you could share a little bit more about that piece. As I said in the beginning, I work a lot on the plastics issue and thinking, for example, of packaging, even for food and beverage as a service, and what that would mean in terms of keeping assets in circulation in bigger reusable packaging systems. It's a completely different way of thinking through operations, the business model, the assets, the ownership model. So would love to hear maybe from the built environment and energy respectively how you think about these new business models.
Sure. So I think circular economy as well, but also climate change. We took a step. Well, first of all, there's some mandates. We took a step for COP26 in November that we were no longer going to support clients who either mined, extracted, or transported fossil fuels, long-chain hydrocarbons. That was we decided, and it was a big part of our business. And we said no, we need to be better. So we've stopped doing that. We've also instigated on our projects that everybody is doing a net zero assessment of their projects and how that is going to impact decisions, all the way down from size, type of the buildings, of the infrastructure pieces, through to materials. We're changing specifications to look at the actual materials impact. Steel content, how it's made, can we reuse elements of steel, can we go to the steel fabricator and see what they've got, can we make that work? So we're changing that elementally. And I think the other thing we're starting to do is looking at our supply chain, is to see, how the things are fabricated. So precast always sounds like a great idea. It's like, okay, but how is it precast? What are the pieces? What are the rules they've got? Is it a union shop? Are the workforce being taken care of? So we're starting to go down into much deeper thoughts on not just the end product, but the bits that we do from a design perspective. How do we design and specify it? Is it the right? Column grid's the obvious one. Can we get a little bit more out of it? What does that mean for reuse? How do you design it so you can dismantle a building at the end? Not a great subject with developers usually, but there is a building will have residual value. So how do we take that as a residual value and say this steel beam or this concrete beam, we're going to reuse that later. It may not be for the same span or load, but we can downrate it and use it. It could have a second life rather than crushing it, sending it off for general fill somewhere, and then having to cast rebar or new steel put in place. So the reuse element, starting with materials passports and things like that, is now becoming a big thing about driving it through. So.
Fascinating. Kate, maybe your thoughts on product as a service models or other new business models?
Yeah, I think the circular economy requires us, and the energy transition, right? It requires us to think long term, and as such, I think we're all hearing in the news more and more the constraints around our raw materials, particularly when you think about energy storage solutions, right? Both that are a critical pillar of the energy transition, both for grid flexibility, but also for the revolution of electric vehicles to unfold. So right there, in order for us to realize our ambitious goals and see this mass decarbonization and electrification, we already know that we have a challenge ahead where the materials that are needed to realize this future are not infinite and are already in short supply. So I think thinking about, to Tom's point, it begins at the design phase, what's going to happen to these products at the end of life? What are we going to do with them? And that's certainly a critical piece of how we view our work in business models. And we're starting to experiment. We're working with our partner and customer Nissan, for example, on, and they're thinking ahead. What's going to happen at the end of life with all the batteries in their vehicles? And so we're experimenting with some pilot projects to take those disused batteries and deploy them as stationary solutions for power plants. I think it's in Spain, so we're excited to test the waters and learn what we can from that work, and then hopefully scale it, right, so that we can get going and start laying the infrastructure for what will be needed in the future. And another example, when we think of product as a service, a great example is our work with electric buses. A lot of people don't know this, but we're actually the largest operator of electric buses in the world outside of China. And we fully finance, own, and operate buses for our customers. So we maintain the asset, but I think another part of that that's important to highlight is that some of these assets are not otherwise, cities and schools can't otherwise own them upfront, and so this model allows them to access and take part in this evolution, this revolution with electrifying mobility. And that greater access, I think, further fuels decarbonization. So all these things are interlinked, absolutely, at the end of the day.
Thanks, Kate, and fascinating to hear about these cross-sector and cross-industry collaborations, as you said, collaborating with folks that traditionally are not part of really your radar screen, right? We have a few minutes left, so I would maybe open it to the floor for any questions for Tom or Kate.
Or Christian.
Or Christian.
First of all, thank you for sharing all these resources. I'm really looking into doing a deep dive. But you talked about how you're sort of crossing boundaries between different companies, and you have a chance to work with all these bigger companies. And I find that one of the things I see as a barrier is this culture shift, right? Like you're looking at your company's bottom lines in all these different aspects. And I think that is absolutely the right way, the only way to really see the value of what you're doing. But how do we convince bigger corporations? How do we convince the day-to-day consumer that they need to pay that premium cost and the government to subsidize the right kind of thing? So how, beyond talking to each other and having these conversations, how do you talk to your clients? What's the talking points?
That's a great question. And honestly, it's like the thorniest question out there. It sounds a little trite, but you have to start somewhere. We've had a lot of success talking to people by just laying out what the options are and saying, okay, it is right now a little more expensive, but if you're going for financing, whoever you borrow your money from in the market right now has an ESG report they have to meet, usually, and those funds are usually well subscribed. So there's a bonus to that. So there's no legislation right now that would force people to do it. I think so. My drivers would be legislation. It's not available. There's altruism. So the board, somebody on the board says I'd like to do it, and there's a there, pat on the head, go and do a trial. There's the market that says I want this, and so corporations will respond. Or the corporation itself has said, this is actually our strategic direction, we're going this way, and they make a commitment. The general public, getting the general public on board to say, I want change, that's a long haul to get there. I was young enough, I'm going to say young enough, that when I moved to the States, sustainability here was just beginning to emerge as an issue. UK, Europe, everybody was already involved. We were building buildings, designing infrastructure around sustainability. The conversations we had here, which are very... time's up. Let's just finish this though. Okay. The conversations we had then about there's a better way and the advent of LEED and all that. No developers wanted to touch LEED when it first came out. Now it's a household name because the population has got onto the fact that I want some of that. I want to live in a better building. I want there to be daylight, and I want there to be, amenities and that sort of thing. And so there is a groundswell that's happening, but I think we're probably 5 years away from general public. I'm not being rude to general public, that sounds awful. But general public en masse saying, I'm willing to make the commitment to change. Because that takes, you can argue on percentages, but usually about somewhere between 25 and 30% of the population has to stand up at once and go, yes. And I don't think we're there yet on circular economy. We are absolutely there on sustainability, and that's our link in, is to say this is the next phase. This is how we deal with climate change in some way, and circular economy is a big part of that. But we've got a journey, a long journey ahead of us, measured in years, not in months. So I don't really have an answer other than keep talking and talk to as many people as you can. So maybe you present next year. There you go. Tony, right here, there's a volunteer.
Maybe just if Kate wants to come in on the question.
Yeah, I think, it's probably the most important question. Like, how do you drive this all forward? I think Tom hit all the really, important points that are needed. Policy certainly plays a critical piece. I think we saw, the SEC is making some moves to require companies to begin, mandating disclosure. So that, I think, will get things going. Investor pressure, right? Understanding how companies are performing, understanding what their risks are ahead. It's not just from an altruistic perspective, it's like their bottom line. How will these companies perform as the climate, as we evolve in the next 10, 20 years? But I also am seeing companies, view this as a strategic opportunity where they can be the industry leader and buy down some of the premium by testing out new technologies, testing out new approaches, and then their peers are watching and hopefully will be fast followers. But yeah, it's a tough challenge, especially on the consumer end of things. But once you get the consumers demanding these sorts of products and services, then that's a game changer.
Great, thanks, Kate. We have time for one more short question. I see here in the back. Let me swivel through here. Oh, you're making me really run. I chose the farthest away.
One of the things that has to be done is to control the politicians who are getting money from special interests and companies to do the wrong thing. And even if they destroy the world, as long as they're making money, they don't care about us, including the Coke industries and other industries that have been damaging the environment for many years. So something has to be done globally to police these companies and the lobbyists and stop lobbying and fine them for their corrupt activities in the U.S. and worldwide, including like what Putin and others are doing now to destroy the world. So we can't do anything unless we can control the politicians who are actually, we're not really in a democracy. We're being, ruled by dictators all around the world.
I agree. I don't think that requires an answer, though.
Absolutely, and maybe Kate, just to top it off, I think there's a question also of regulation and what type of global agreements we need to have in some cases, top-down approach. Any final thoughts before we wrap up?
Yeah, I mean, there's probably a whole day or week you could dedicate to the policy discussion. I think from the perspective of companies, like having some standardization is going to be important in order for them to be able to meet these requirements. Otherwise, if they're having to completely change course and strategy depending on region, I wonder if that will be counterproductive to how effective they can meet these types of ambitious goals. I'm seeing, a lot of policy coalitions come together and trying to coalesce, more regular guidance for companies to follow. So maybe that's one approach, but yeah, the regulation is the stick and then the carrot, right? Both. It can enable.
Absolutely, and it can enable by giving clarity in some cases as well, right? And de-risk investment if the direction is clear. Great. So on that note, I want to thank both Tom and Kate and also the audience for the questions. The key takeaway for me is leadership, where you opened the discussion. I think if we consider that we're all leaders in this space and need to set examples and learn and share these learnings to pull the whole system forward into a new type of thinking that's more circular and more sustainable. That's what we are here to do, and that's what this week is about. So thanks again to the organizers, and I'll hand back